Dear friends, the Shabbat preceding Purim is known in our tradition as Shabbat Zachor, the Sabbath of remembrance. Haman, whose name we will drown out with spinning groggers next week, the Bible identifies as descendant of Amalek, the archetype of evil and the Israelites' enemy during their early desert wanderings. So in anticipation of Purim, we read from the book of Deuteronomy of Amalek's cruelty, and specifically the command, Zachor, remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt, how undeterred by fear of God he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when the Lord grants you safety from all your enemies around you in the land the Lord your God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Lo tishkach, do not forget. The Amalekites are considered the paradigm of wickedness, not because they attacked the Israelites in the desert. Other peoples did that too. But rather because of the manner in which they ambushed them and whom they slaughtered. The Amalekites knew that the Israelites, just setting out from Egypt, were vulnerable, weak from hunger and fatigue, and they chose as their victims the weakest among them, the old and the frail and the sick, the stragglers, those left behind who could not keep up. The cruelty of Amalek is precisely what we are witnessing in President Putin's assault on Ukrainian civilians. Schools, hospitals, including a maternity ward bombed on Wednesday. Those fleeing through what were promised to be corridors of safe passage. Even as we pray this war ends quickly, our congregation will continue to support the relief effort through organizations such as AFIA, IsraAid, the World Union for Progressive Judaism, and the Joint Distribution Committee. And we thank you for enabling us to do so. We have been reminded, in case we had forgotten, that Haman's wickedness still lives on in this world. But we have also come to see, because the Ukrainian people have demonstrated it, that so too does Esther's bravery live on. And on Purim, we celebrate it. Tonight, in anticipation of the holiday, we welcome an artist who holds a place in the Guinness Book of World Records for creating the world's longest scroll of Esther, the world's longest Megillah. Avner Moriah is among the first generation of Israeli-born artists. A painter whose career spans nearly 5 decades, he has created murals depicting biblical scenes, Israeli history, and the landscapes of his native Jerusalem. He has also illuminated the complete Pentateuch, created his own Passover Haggadah, one series of illustrations of the weekly Torah portions, and another on the Jewish holiday cycle. His work has been displayed around the world, and this evening we welcome him to present and teach us about his illuminated Scroll of Esther, officially the longest in existence at 91 feet. So as our preparations for Purim begin, please join me in welcoming Avner Moriah.
Good evening. It's a great honor to be here tonight on the eve of Purim, and also seeing this sweet child going to have his bar mitzvah next week in Jerusalem, Israel. I wish him the very best. I want to start and say that I probably wouldn't have been standing here if it wasn't for my late friend Gershon Kext, that kept on haunting me and saying, for years he collected my landscapes of Israel, And then he kept on hunting me and saying, why don't you do something for the Jewish people? So I started to work, and the first project that I did was 2 big murals that were hosted in JTS. One was the gathering at Mount Sinai, and the other one was about the women of the Zodiac. And when I finished my projects, friends of mine said, why don't you do something lighter? Maybe you should pick some tale from any kind of place you choose from. And then I thought, okay, if it's a tale, I'll look in the Bible, and I found the story of Esther. Seemed to be a quite interesting project. Well, this project lasted for 15 years, and it actually has 3 different components to it, because although I hold the Guinness Book of Record for the longest Megillah, it's not for the biggest Megillah. The difference is, and now I have to add something about myself, my destination was there where before I started my journey, because I'm totally dyslexic. So I have people helping me out with texts and stuff like that. And when we looked at, when I presented my scroll the first time, it was 16 meters and 32 centimeters long, which is quite long to start with. But they came back to me and said, well, there is a bigger Megillah than yours. It's 19.59 big. But, so I thought to myself, probably linear meters. And so when I completed my Megillah, it was 28 meters long. I figured I passed it way more than the 19.59, but they meant square meters, not linear meters. And when we actually calculated my square footage of my Megillah, it comes short about 1.60 m, square meter 60. I thought to myself, I'm not going to give up now. And I'm actually, these few months, adding some more sheets to my Megillah, so it won't only be the longest, but also the biggest. I will tell you a little bit about the journey of my Megillah. Originally, when I started to work on this project, for years I painted the Israeli landscape, and I came to illustrating the biblical text not from studying illustration, but from being an artist and a painter. And it's not the same, the approach. And so when I chose to work on my Megillah, I read the text, and like most Israelis, we are quite, you don't use the word here, but in Israel we're quite secular, meaning that we're not observant Jews. So my neighbor in the army, when I was in officer school, was a rabbi. His name is Shlomo Fuchs. And I turned to him and said, would you be kind enough to help me through the text so I'll know what I'm doing, because I don't know. For you, young guy, the most important thing is to know when you don't know. So anyway, I came up with 76 illustrations following the text. Now, you know, in Judaism, there's 2 ways how you can approach the biblical text. One is pshat, meaning you read the text as is, and the other one is by midrash, which means the interpretation of the rabbis that studied the text throughout history. And so my approach was, I wanted to be inclusive and not just limited to our own people, and I chose to work on the biblical text from the pshat, meaning looking at the text as is. So I came up with 76 different images of the text, and in order to support myself, which all these years, I always supported myself through the arts. I found 4 families in the States that commissioned from me to do 4 different Megillot for each family. When I completed that, I thought to myself, maybe I should do one for, and from them I picked just, from the 76 images that I had, I picked several images to put the Megillah together. And then I thought I should do one that would include all 76 images. And since I worked on a couple of projects before, and I have 3 kids, I figured each one will get something from me, and then they can argue after I go who gets what. So now, as I was working on my illustrating the Bible, the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, it took me also 15 years. I worked on these 2 projects on and off. Once I completed the 5 books of Moses, I decided I'm going to jump in and complete this other project of mine, which is the story of Esther. And first of all, you have to know, young guy, I'm a workaholic. I never get tired or decide it's too hard. So I kept on working, and I get up every day at like 3:30 in the morning. By 4:30, I'm wide awake. And by 8:30, most people just start the day, and I'm halfway through. But my day lasts till 10 at night. And so I took the text, and I started putting all the components together, sheet after sheet, line after line. And as I told you, I'm totally dyslexic, so I didn't write the Megillah, because if I also had to write it, it would probably never be done. But so I have a scribe that wrote it for me, and the way that I worked was I planned everything ahead of time, because if you just go along, you want the images to coincide with the text. So everything was mapped out, and once it was all mapped out, I put it aside, and then I finished my Bible. So when I came back to it, I saw that my figures seemed to be a little small. So I erased all the figures on my scroll of Esther and repainted them again, so they would feel more fit better in the images, in the parchment. So then I worked and I finished the whole project. And what you're going to see today is the second part of the third part, which is not done yet. That's that I'm working on. My scroll that is 28.3 meters long. And when you actually see it, I painted it with brushes with like 5 hairs on it, and tiny brushes, but I have a tremendous amount of patience, although those that know me wouldn't really understand that that's the amount of patience that I do. So now they're going to unveil my scroll. This is the printed version of the original one, and the original one is right now on the Bima, so if you guys want to come later on, take a look at it, you would see how intricate the painting goes on there. You're welcome to take a look while it gets opened. The amount of, what I do want to add is that the amount of, when I worked on this project, there were 3 elements that interested me. One was since I live in Israel, I always think about my location, and so I have elements from the Near East, which is the design elements which are two-dimensional, but my education is a Renaissance education, a Western education, so I mix both the two-dimension and the three-dimension in my painting. And in order to make this Megillah stand through time, I decided I would add the biblical text in it, which combines these two ideas together. So those that want to take a look, you could actually see how much information, visual information, is in there. So there's one more component that I didn't tell you, but when I finished the whole project, and looking back right now, a year or so ago, I thought to myself, I did the Chumash, and the reason that I started to work on the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, was because my wife battled cancer. She had leukemia, and unfortunately, after 10 years, she passed away. But in the middle, there was a lull, because we went through 2 rounds of chemo, and after the first round, we had 5 years of semi-tranquility. So it's like the story of Esther, where you think everything is going well, but it wasn't. It was tricky. And eventually, she had to go through a bone marrow transplant. And after she passed away, and I looked back, I said, wow, the Megillah was just in a perfect timing, because it seemed like everything is going one way, yet it was going another way. So right now, this evening, with me is my beautiful girlfriend that came all the way from Israel, Ruti Fine, that stands here with you. She is probably embarrassed that I even say that her name is here. But the other idea that I want to say, that life goes on, like the story of Esther. We continue our lives and things get better. And she is sharing my journey right now with me. And I really want to thank you for being here tonight to look at the scroll and enjoy it. And those that want to see the actual parchment later can come up to the bima and take a look. And through my journey with the scrolls of Esther, I actually, they're made with parchment, meaning cows that sacrificed their lives to become a work of art. And yet I think that most cows, we eat them and we move on. And these share with us, once they become parchment and the biblical text is written on them, they turn to a higher sphere and they last forever. So I think wherever those cows are, probably say thank you for having me paint on them. So enjoy the rest of the service, and I'm going to go and sit quietly in my corner.